Svali, I am deeply honored to welcome you to Unbroken. I have learned a lot from you, from your website, your blog, your one book that I've read so far. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me. As we've discussed, my goal is to share our stories and help people understand the global cult and mind control, considering we're all under it. So thank you again so much for being here.
All right, thank you for having me, Max. I appreciate it.
So if we could maybe start with, for people who may not know you, a little background, how did you come to be part of the cult and kind of what was your experience and how, at what point and how did you get out?
Well, that could be several hours right there, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, I was conceived in a genetics laboratory in CERN, Switzerland. That's where the Jesuits have their main genetics labs, and so I am what's called G3 or Generation 3 of the. That's based on the genetics protocols that the Jesuits used because after World War II, Generation One was basically 1945 to 1951. Generation Two was 51 to 56, and then G3 started in 57. And what it is each generation, it was a genetic knowledge because I know that there's a lot of stuff that's been in the media over the years about discovering the human genome and how traits where they said, well, this knowledge is actually known to the cults many, many years ago. And so they were able, even by the late 1940s, to splice and to create uh, embryos, zygotes that would have the characteristics such as sex, eye color, hair color, height, strength, and by my generation, they even were incorporating things like healing ability. The ability for the body to heal itself fairly rapidly. Um, if you become ill, things like that, and of course through the years they're now up to into the probably the 20s in their generations. We're probably into G27. I don't know because I left years ago, but I know that they were always exponentially trying to improve their knowledge. And so now they're trying to select for personality traits, such as perseverance and things like that. And of course, high intelligence too. Now was a desired trait as well.
Hmm. I just want to say you said something that really caught my attention. I have said this before. When I was born in 64, so I guess I would be the one after. And my body did have an ability to heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever injury it was, and I still have that ability,
Yes.
even as an adult. And I never get sick, or maybe
Yes.
I start to, but my body just eliminates it before it even shows up. So, and that's been noted by doctors in my adult life. I had a surgery like 10 years ago-ish to remove a tumor beneath my shoulder. It was a fatty tumor. And it healed. They told me I would be in bed and painkillers, which I threw in the garbage. And the next morning after the surgery, I was out hiking in the woods. And when
Yep.
I went back for my first follow-up, the woman couldn't, like she was having a fit. She couldn't believe that it was fully healed and I didn't need to come back. So
Oh yeah.
that's really, really interesting that you say that. I've never heard that before. So,
Oh, oh yeah. I went 10 years without even getting a cold, and that was very common. I mean, growing up, um, you know, never sick, except that I do remember that I was allowed to get measles and mumps. But other than that, never sick ever.
hmm.
And even into adulthood. So yeah, the human body's amazing. And so they tried to incorporate that into their genetics and also muscular strength without the muscle looking large and massive too. They actually create they found the genotype where you can have strong muscles, but your muscles look normal size too. And so things like that. Height.
So why would they, I mean, I kind of think I know the answer, but just for the sake of discussing this, why would they want to genetically engineer very strong, very intelligent, very resilient people?
Because of the high stress and demands placed on the body while they were training people. Also, the kinds of missions that we were doing as we were adults, we were out. I mean, if you have people who are going to be going through military soldier training and also becoming skilled assassins, you want strength and all those abilities. If you're out on a mission, you get injured, it helps to be able to wrap your arm up and to know that you're going to be able to heal fairly rapidly, especially if they use healing technologies afterwards and things like that.
So one thing, and we can go back, we can sort of go into your story in stages, but one thing I always talk about is attachment. I studied psychology. I understand, from the experiments they've done on monkeys and everything else, that for the infant, attachment is more vital than food, even, right?
Yeah.
This is the way that we're built. And I remember a ritual as a baby where they deliberately broke attachment in certain ways with my mother. And when I look out at society and the way babies are born in hospitals, and how they take them to the room and they're all the bassinets are lined up, and even when I gave birth to my daughter 21 years ago almost, the insistence was to take her from me, to put her in the room, so this still continues to this day. So when I look out there, I see myriad ways that they want to break attachment, forcing both parents to work, sending kids into the state earlier and earlier. And with SRA survivors like us, they've done it in a ritualistic fashion. So I'm curious, what was your experience growing up with that, and what do you think that is all about?
Actually, that's the topic of the new book I came out with a couple weeks ago. It's called Never Give Up, and it's an autobiography of my first 14 years. And I talk very much and in detail about some of the attachment means used and methodologies and the manipulation of the attachment as well. Because in the Jesuit order, one of the things they do is Mengele discovered that the birth mother is your first programmer, was the very best programmer because fetuses automatically sync with their mother's brain waves. They have trouble differentiating themselves from the birth mother. And therefore, when the birth mother is telling the fetus things such as you're a good baby or you're a bad baby in response to certain things, the fetus will wholeheartedly incorporate that. And it's very much harder to break later in life than if this process, because before Mengele, people used to start children programming, when they were 2 or 3. But Mengele proved that very young children and then even fetuses could be programmed. And that's part of the secret part of his research that's never been publicly disclosed. But it's also the reason why a lot of the major occultic societies, they're international and have trainers conferences and stuff, have called him the father of modern programming. Because over time, most groups have started incorporating prenatal programming, because that's your first and deepest attachment is to the birth mother, because you depend on her for life itself. And so I'm going to trigger warning, it'll be a little graphic here, but let's say that the birth mother is asking you to obey the trainer and say, these are the people that can keep you safe, always do what they tell you. And so then let's say that the outside trainer is saying, I want you to move towards a light in the womb, they'll put a little light on the womb. And let's say the baby does it, then the birth mother pat her stomach and say, oh, I love you, you're such a good baby, you're so obedient. But if the baby doesn't want to go towards a light, because little fetuses are meant to be in the dark, and a light can, they don't like the light because it kind of hurts their little sensitive eyes. And so if the baby doesn't obey, then the birth mother will say, shock her because she's a bad baby. And then they'll shock the womb and the fetus will get shocked. And then the birth mother says, you were a bad baby. And that's why, well, so they're using your first attachment to teach you what's good and bad, which is a core level of obedience to programming then throughout life. And this continues after birth because the birth mother is killed during a birth ritual, but they will bond you then to other programmers as an infant. I remember having 12 fathers that I loved, and there were three primary fathers I loved the most. I was the most attached to. And so these were the individuals that as a baby, they held me, they rocked me, they gave me bottles, but there's also a female Jesuit, and there are females in the Jesuit order, just so you know, on the occult side, not on the public side, but on the occult side, who would nurse me as a baby and rock me. And I bonded greatly to them as well. And so, but they also abused me. So that continued the split. The person I love and depend on, the person I bonded to, the fathers, that I love and who loved me also abused me. And so that created a split between love and abuse at a very primary level, and especially as a very young infant. But there's also the trauma of them killing the birth mother at my birth. And I was told they killed her during the ritual because, quote unquote, I was so evil that I destroyed her and things like that. That also created psychological guilt that they could then build their programming on. Because if you believe that you're this horrible creature that killed your birth mother, the person that you love, then you're going to believe I deserve bad things, and you're not going to fight the abuse and the torture and trauma as much. And they knew because they were master manipulators.
Yeah. Wow. That's very powerful. And, when you say that, I was also convinced that I was evil. My birth mother, to my knowledge, wasn't killed. It's the mother that I had. But I was told that I destroyed her by being born. And that was repeated over and over. And she herself told me that over and over. And as a baby, she would sometimes come into the room if I cried and slam me against the wall and yell at me and beat me. Other
Yeah.
times she might pick me up and feed me and rock me. So it's kind of parallel to what you're saying. She was I believe she was definitely DID, but she would go into violent mother, depressed, suicidal mother, or nice, fun, okay mother.
Yeah. Yeah. And so she was also modeling for you dissociation.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So talk a little more about the agenda with what they did to you and in a sort of similar fashion what they did to me, because a lot of people will think that these are horrible dark people and they just do horrible dark things, but they do alternate back and forth between the torture, the abuse, and the bonding, right? So it's a
Yes.
traumatic bonding, but explain that to people a little bit, if you would.
About the bonding and the versus the torture.
Yeah, yeah. What are they trying to do there?
Well, a couple of things. One is that the fathers that were my primary programmers were they generally loved me. They loved the children. In fact, I remember when I was older, looking forward to when the babies came each year because they came on uh, the eve of Epiphany, okay, or January 5th. And so we would get the new batches of babies because they are, conceived in petri dishes and then implanted, they can time the birth so that each new class is going to be born during that week. And everyone generally loves a baby. So part of it, the bonding is genuine because they are loving as much as they can, but in a very constrained way. Because when people fear Satan, they're not free to love. And that's what happened in the orders. People were afraid of the entities they serve. They called them the immortals. And because of that fear that was instilled in them, they were never free to really love, but they wanted to love. And they genuinely tried to as much as they could. So some of the bonding was actually real, but some of it was very, very intentional and manipulated as well. A lot of it. And the abuse as well. And it was to create parts with behaviors, beliefs, and the resulting actions, as well as the structures inside the person to hold the mind control. That was the reason they did all of this. The love was so that you would want to obey, so that you love the order, so you were loyal to it. And then the of course abuse was considered the necessary evil to accomplish a means, or to help the individual overcome their mortality, because the Jesuits on the dark side believe in ascension and descension. They believe that people are either ascending towards godhood and immortality, or they're descending towards hell. And they had a lot of hell setups too, to show what happens if you live as a mortal and you're in your mortal body, and you're basically disobedience to your programming means you're descending and you go to hell. Whereas obedience to your programming and loyalty to the order and loyalty to the immortals that they believe in meant ascending, So basically it was to inculcate a spiritual and belief in also the mind control that would allow the children raised by them to do the different things they want them to do, whether it was to be a skilled assassin, whether it was to help oversee a trafficking organization, whether it was to, I don't know, infiltrate other groups, which, to gather intelligence, or whether to, help, and of course, or to help with programming, and of course all the children are raised to know, become skilled programmers. But certain ones show special aptitude, and then they join the training council and they become head programmers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something when you're talking, I have made this point before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. This kind of trauma that fragments, and this trauma-based mind control and these rituals, these people in the order, these families, they do it to their own, to prepare them, to groom them for global positions, or for whatever, like you just said, to be an assassin, or to be whatever it is. So I think that's an important point to make, because people have said to me, like, do you hate your mother? And I say, no, because I love her. And she's herself a victim of the same thing that they did to me, and that they had her do to me. So it's really complicated, isn't it? Because the people that will do these atrocities have themselves been done to, right? So talk
Yes.
a little bit about that.
Well, it's generational. I mean, hundreds of years ago, the programming was different in some ways, because then it was more like, being buried alive, or going through a ritual, or having, and they still had a lot of the ceremonies and things like that. They didn't have the technology back then, but they've been dissociated for centuries in the Jesuit order, and most of the cultic societies as well. It's passed on. The parents model what dissociation looks like. Um, if you had parents, I was raised in a facility, so the people around me, of course, modeled it. I personally did not know anyone at any level of the order that was not dissociative, all the way up to the superior general, by the person people call the Black Pope, who is not the one on the public websites, by the way. They have their own real Black Pope. And they're all dissociative, but they were all raised in a similar way. They were raised in ways to develop structured dissociation.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned just now that you were raised in a facility. I was wondering if you could just give a little more detail about that. And as I understand it, this facility was in Rome, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And they have several facilities. Now they have like dormitories and training rooms beneath the Vatican itself, but they also have their main programming facility is in the north of Rome. Um, and it also is most of it is underground. And I think on the top two floors, you would never know that there was a whole facility there. And so it was a fully equipped facility with gymnasiums, with I don't know, with huge programming studios that were like almost like movie production studios. They could play, the walls could turn into screens that showed images. They had holograms, they had VR, they had all kinds of machine technology, and they had all kinds of other programming equipment there too. But they also had classrooms as well. So we would, in fact, so we called it the Vatican School. And so the kids, once, like the younger children, are sorted, and then by 3 to 6 they kind of are doing activities together, but they're not really, and they're learning a lot, but they're not in school full time. But when you're 6, you put on your little brown robe, you look like a little miniature monk or acolyte's robe, and then you start going to school full time, and that education is one that would rival, they call it the best education in the world. That's what they called it. It was also very abusive, but we learned anatomy, physiology, languages. We learned ancient languages. We had mage classes where we had to learn to do the incantations and the rituals. We had, you know, we had to learn all kinds of stuff. There was creative arts because they believe in that too. And then, of course, gymnasium time to learn martial arts and various things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking before we started, and I'm kind of thrilled to have learned about you and met you now, because I was also taken to an underground facility in Rome. And the way that I remember it, it was so big. It was like its own
Hmm.
city almost, right? It
Hmm.
had everything.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah. And
And they had biometric security too. I remember that, like to go into the labs and things.
yeah,
But they also had like when you go into the programming labs at the main facility for the Jesuits, they have a small icon of Shiva over the door. And I remember we had to do a sacrifice each morning too. And at the end of the day, I mean, they really do believe in doing this kind of stuff to empower it, you know.
yeah. And speaking of sacrifices, I know I was taken always through underground tunnels to these sub levels of the Vatican, where I witnessed children being, brutalized and sacrificed while alive. I wonder if
Yeah.
you were also part of those rituals.
Yes, I had to participate in rituals there as well. And I remember that they have a level called Satan's Throne. And that's a huge golden throne that sits with a red carpet leading up to it. And I remember being taken there as a child by the fathers, as part of my spiritual training, of course. And I remember they did sacrifices like for hours. And then I remember lining the walls all around were leaders of occultic societies and also various world leaders. And they were there to ask Satan for a favor. And so he would come and sit on the throne, and they would have ground glass or nails or hot rocks, like on a pathway to the throne. And he would make these supplicants come and crawl on their hands and knees before him and ask him a favor in that room. And once he granted them the favor, then he would ask them for a sacrifice of some kind. And it might be, let's say it's someone who wanted to get rid of an opposing political party in his country and to win, then he would grant the favor if the person agreed to give a tithe to of his country's income, whether in money or in trafficked children, back in return for the favor. And they would. If they did, then the favor is granted, and then that automatically brought in more children for sacrifices, or else it brought in more money because these are very well-funded people.
Yeah. Um, I want to delve a little into that because with Hollywood and all this, the kind of the way that people have been programmed is that, you know, that Satan isn't real, the devil is this kind of weird character. It's very sort of theatrical. But in my experience, and it sounds like in yours as well, I mean, this is a real entity. And I have seen rituals where demonic entities enter, you know, the room. And
Mhm.
so I think this is an important piece for people to understand that, you know, this is a god or an entity that these people worship and follow and obey, and that this is real. This is not some kind of cartoon thing like they tend to portray it out in society.
I agree. I mean, I've seen it, like I said, they worship the immortals too, who in the end are demonic entities. But they don't let you know that when you're a baby. The mortals, they actually, when you're a baby, they have actors come in dressed like beautiful beings who hold the baby and say, I'm so and so, like I'm Althea, the tree of life, and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to teach you this and that. But as you get older, you find out the real nature of those beings. And they are definitely demonic spirits. But I've seen Satan in two forms. In the Vatican, he used to show up, like in the lower levels of the Vatican when you're there. I saw him in his beautiful form, which we called Theo, which means God. He's not God, but he wants to be. And he looked like a handsome man, like in his 20s, with a widow's peak and dark hair and wearing a suit and all that. But then he had his hideous form. And he sat on his throne to take favors from world leaders. He'd be in his hideous form. So I've seen him in both forms. But all I can say is this is one very malicious fallen angel that wants to destroy human beings, that is a liar, a murderer, and a thief. And he will take everything people foolishly give him. And that's one reason I left the order, for several reasons. One is I remember when I was a general in the Jesuit army, and I was also running our main training facility. So I would have been in my early 30s at the time. So that was years ago. And there was a 4-year-old who was extremely bright child and genetically enhanced to have an IQ that, very, very high. And I remember her being 4 and looking at me and the other fathers, Jesuit fathers, and saying, why are you all afraid of Satan? Why are you listening to him? Why don't you all just agree to stop? A 4-year-old child asked me this. She was smarter than we were. And
Well,
that took me aback. And looking back, she was right and we were wrong.
it's
And
powerful.
yeah, because people do really foolish things when they serve Satan.
Oh. The cost is way higher than any perceived benefit.
Oh, yeah. That's
Mm.
why I left.
So talk about, you just mentioned that you were a programmer. So people begin to understand what programming is and also what mind control is and why it's used on really all of us. Um, if you wouldn't mind describing what would programming look like in the cult, since you were privy to that?
Well, it starts in the womb and it ends until the day the person dies if they never leave. Um, because they're always reinforcing it in adults as well. Um, there's so many things I could cover that I'm not sure where to start. That's kind of like saying, can you explain the atmosphere? You know?
Something, maybe something basic, something, the skeleton of it.
All right, I'll give one example of programming. All right.
Okay.
I remember being I'll describe how it was done to me as a child, and I'll describe something I saw when I was older. I remember being 2.5 years old, and I had one of my system controllers inside, and in the Jesuit order, they would attach ropes. So I had 6 children attached to me by these ropes. Okay. And the children were all roughly the same age. And as a system controller, one of the Jesuit fathers, his name was Father Jerome, he was Pleiades. And he was telling me and I was Athena in this. And so I was a presentation controller. And he was saying, I want you to have the children obey you. Do not touch the candy in the red room. Okay, so as we're going around, we were in this area, this studios where they had the rooms of different colors. So we go into the red room, and sure enough, there's all kinds of candy on a table. And so one of the children the children want to stampede to this table. I remember screaming, no, no, don't. He's, because Pleiades is supposed to be a master control over the system. I said, no, you can't do this. Children, stop. Well, they tugged me over, and one of the girls grabbed a piece of candy, started eating it, and then she fell over dead. And so the other one, like, dude. So, so I'm pulling her away, and I'm just heartbroken. I mean, I just lay down and start crying because she died because I couldn't get her to obey me. And then Pleiades comes in. He's a father, and he says, because as a system controller, you didn't make one of your people you're over obey you. She died. And so for the rest of the day, I had to drag that dead child around. And he said, you're going to feel the weight of your disobedience, the weight of your sins, because you didn't control her. And so this was to psychologically teach the system controller, if the parts under you don't obey, they die. And so this inculcates throughout the person's life the only way to keep parts safe is to obey. And that was a belief that they really were trying to inculcate. And then we go into another room, and please said, do not touch any of the toys. And it was filled with toys. Well, the kids are bored because after, we've been in that house for hours. And one of them touches a toy, and sure enough, he dies. So then I have to drag him around. So the other kids, after that, the other four were like, okay, we'll listen. When you say don't touch, we won't touch. So for the rest of the day, whenever police comes in and as a master controller in the system, that's what you represent. He'd say, all right, have some juice. And as long as he said it was okay, then we could have the juice. Or if he said, go and rest for a while, we would rest. Or if he'd say, do this, we would do it. But I remember just weeping and crying myself to sleep because I was so heartbroken over the 2 children that I couldn't control and who died as a result. So that's one example of programming that's done to help develop in the system controllers the belief that they have to control the parts beneath them and the disastrous things that happen. Another example of training that can be done is where you place someone into like a high-tech machine, and they use what's called entrainment too. And what entrainment is, it's a technology where the person will be seeing virtual reality. And as they're seeing the virtual reality play out, and it's very realistic, then they might be programmed to believe various things, such as, let's say they want to instill the belief, I like sadistic sex. Then they, in the machine, then they're going to stimulate with microbursts the sexual centers of the brain. And also the child might be given even drugs. but they'll combine it with VRs of the child performing very violent, sadistic acts and enjoying it. And they will then the machine will also then hit the pleasure center, the bliss center of the brain, so that they feel great bliss when they're doing this. And so as a child goes through that machining protocol day after day for weeks and months, the parts then that enjoy violent um, sex against others will develop. So those are two different types of training. That's why I said there's so much that's incorporated in training. It's like, where do you start and where do you end? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I remember in the 70s in the facility that I was in Rome, technology that is, so they've had technology that's like, I don't know, 75 years more advanced, right? Because
Yes.
I remember that VR. I remember the mask on my head and the headphones, and I remember a helmet with wires coming out of it, and
Hmm.
even a room which would simulate, like, which would, I wouldn't know which end was up anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, but the
so,
machine I'm describing actually is clear plastic, and the person can actually lay down in it, or else it can be upright and it covers the entire body. So that the person will also have the physical sensations during the programming as well as the visual.
okay,
Because
okay.
they've been able to map brain waves of people who are undergoing extreme torture, and then they can program that into the machine so that the VR actually causes a person to feel the pain and torture of the event. And that's one of the technologies they've developed too. But entrainment is a really vicious technology because the machine can just sit and do it over and over and over until it's ground into the subconscious mind.
Yeah, for some reason, when you're talking, I'm thinking of things I've seen recently of I forget what they call it, because but people walking around nowadays with some kind of mask on their head, and they're like in a different reality. It's starting to become normalized and a cool thing to do. Have you seen that?
I personally haven't, but I live in a small town out of the way. But I'm going to tell you what, if you read anything by now, Ural, is it Harari or Havari? Well,
Yes,
anyway, huh?
Ferrari.
Yeah,
I think it's Ferrari.
Harari. Anything he's written, he talks about wanting people to actually live in a virtual world, where they never leave, kind of like the Matrix. He would love to see society so that where the useless eaters are just sitting in a virtual reality eating and doing that and playing games online, and I believe that our technologies are being they're trying to lever them that way to where people will spend more and more time online. They're going to be offering free VR goggles and masks to kids because they want them enmeshed in this, because it's a great way to use subliminals and other methods to train the brain to think along certain lines. They can't do the programming like they would to someone in a cult who's been horribly tortured since infants or since they were an embryo, but they can instill certain feelings or beliefs about certain topics.
Yeah. And I would say there's been it's been leading up to that with the fact, I mean, think of today. I mean, we're on a screen talking. Everyone
Mhm.
has a cell phone. I think a lot of kids now spend more time looking into a screen than they do looking at a tree outside, or, playing, or
Yeah,
anything in the real world. So I think it's already we've been groomed towards that. So, and that's what they do, right? It's
yeah,
the drip method. They slowly
yeah,
groom society. So now it's probably seems pretty normal to walk around, like you said, in this fake reality. It's sold as good. And then of course, I saw the um what's his name? The Tesla guy
oh,
who,
Elon Musk.
yeah, it was like, oh, it's a good
Uh,
idea to implant a chip in your brain. It'll, and they groom it by seeming benevolent, like, oh, this could help people who are missing a limb or whatever. But it's so we're getting to the point now where I think a lot of people would think that it's superior to be implanted with stuff, to be part machine, to be in these virtual realities. I mean, I think it's all we're already they've already gotten us to that point.
Well, that's Harari's whole point in his books is that if people don't agree to be enhanced by a chip, then they're going to not be part of the intelligent people, which is part of that horrible elitism. Now, at the same time, though, I believe that the God of the Bible is able to stop that kind of stuff or to overcome it. And I also believe that he can protect those that cry out to him. I'm not afraid of this stuff because I know that I serve a God who's greater than anything that they will try to come up with. I already know the things they're coming up with because years ago, I was one of the ones that helped to develop some of the initial thoughts, and prototypes for some of the things. Along with others, we worked in teams and they have people working full time on that junk. But at the same time, in the Bible, I love it says, no weapon formed against you will prosper. And either a person says, well, that's just foolish faith in something, or else you believe it's true. I happen to believe it's true. And I
Yeah.
believe that the God of the Bible can protect people from what's coming. I really
Well,
do.
I actually would say that all of this is to sever that connection that we have with God, with the creator, right? Because that's actually the truest source of our power. And it's a life force energy that, so they would rather convince us to go into this, machine reality, which is far less than that connection with God. That's where the true power lies. So I think they're always trying to sever that connection.
They're trying. And I will tell you something, though. I have tried to escape, and they got a hold of me and tried to program me again 4 times in my life. And once you know the true God of the Bible, there's no amount of programming that can program out the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
There's no amount of programming that can program out the real Jesus. I don't care how much anti-Christian programming they do. They did tons and tons and tons on me. Jesus raping me. I mean, they did machining where if I saw Jesus, I would feel horror. They did machining where I would only want to turn to a fake Jesus, and that I felt bliss if I was serving the fake Jesus, who's really the Antichrist, things like that. So they can try to do that. But if in your heart of hearts you do not want that, they can't succeed.
Right. That's very interesting to hear you say that. I remember I was in the Vatican. I was telling them that the way they were portraying Jesus was bullshit because I was speaking to Jesus and that wasn't at all who he is and what he would say. And
Yes.
they did a ritual where they had Jesus rape me. I've
Yeah.
never heard anyone else say that. Wow.
Yeah. No, they do horrible things like that. They'll do things afterwards in the Jesuit order they have a whole anti-Christian, real Christian programming that they do. They'll take you even as a child and take you into church, and where all the people in the church will rape you, so you will learn to never trust church people when you're older, but to always feel like they're going to end up hurting you if you get close. And then there's other programming where everybody's praising the Lord and stuff, but they're actually praising the false God, the false Jesus. So they do a lot of stuff to mess with your head. But I want to share a really cool story, a real story
Okay.
too. One is that there's something though that happened. I remember being an adult programmer, and as a child, I saw this too. And every once in a while, we would see a real angel come into the infant nursery and go around and touch the children and bless them. And we could see it on the videos. It physically manifested. And we could not open the doors to get in and stop it. Now, how do you explain that? Now, we programmed the infants later. We would shock them and show them pictures of angels and shock them. But that tells me that the God that created us is greater than the technologies and the evil in these labs, in these
Yes.
facilities. And I remember as an adult, the person who was first general in the Jesuit army left. And after he left, I'd say about 10 years after he left, he came back to the Vatican and preached to us, and we couldn't stop him. He walked right through our security, and we have really tough biometric security. I'm going to tell you, it's state of the art. He walked right through it, and he started preaching, and he started sharing about the God that loved us. And he would give what are called words of knowledge. He'd say, I know that you're afraid of this, but I want you to know that God understands. Or I know that you're worried about your brother and what would happen to him if you do this, but I want you to know. Or I know, and he would just speak to our hearts and he preached to us. And that's one of the reasons I tried again the fourth time to get out.
Yeah.
I
Well, no, go ahead.
call it what you will. So even though we were sitting there a couple levels above Satan's throne, doing rituals left and right all day. It didn't stop God from coming in, the real God.
Yeah.
And he asked people to come with him and to leave. And I saw two people leave with him who got out then, including one of my best friends at the time. Now, I didn't have the guts at that time to do it. It took me a while longer. So people left.
And I think that's really important. And it speaks to, I mean, even the little bit you described and what's known out there is, like you said, people get reprogrammed and reprogrammed and reprogrammed. Well, that's telling me that's far inferior to God and to love. Like to keep someone in that is a huge effort. And I look at the world in general and the amount of resources and effort done to poison, our bodies with the food or the chemtrails or the water, to poison our minds with the media and the, EMFs, to educate children from birth, to indoctrinate them in their mentality, all the they've thrown everything and the kitchen sink at human beings. Like it's an extraordinary amount of resources and time and effort. And so that always tells me they have to keep at it to keep us, mind controlled and devolved and, in that darkness, because the natural thing is the exact opposite, right? It's
Yes.
going towards love and light and God. So that is what makes me optimistic that we as a human race are going to overcome this with divine help. And I feel that time is actually now. I don't know what's your thought on that.
As far as the timeline, you mean for overcoming this?
Mhm. And the fact that they have to work so hard to keep us all where we are, and that really shows who who has the power, right?
Yes. And also, I mentioned seeing world leaders around the Vatican, bowing to Satan and things. But I
Yeah,
want you to know that at least 20% of them did not bow to him. God gave us a choice too.
yeah,
And the human will can say no
yeah,
to this kind of stuff. So I'm encouraged the fact that even in that setting, there were people that were given the invitation, said, no, not going, not going to sell my country out. I'm not going to sell my people out. Even though they risked economic harm. I think that the true God placed in us a lot of courage to say no to evil when we know it's there. And so the only reason I share my knowledge is I want people to know the kind of evil, not to discourage them, not to say, oh, it's all over now, because it's not, but to pray against it, to know that when we say no, Simone, my friend who was the general, when he walked through the Vatican, he didn't agree with being intimidated and afraid. He said no to that. And trust me, they tried. They tried all kinds of threats, everything. And he said, no, you can't do that to me anymore. He was fearless. And I believe that we're going to see a generation being raised up of people who are not afraid of Satan, who
Yep.
do not fear him, who do not fear the people who serve him. And I think that's what's going to be happening more and more around the world. I think we're going to see a division between those who serve the God of the Bible and those who serve Satan. It's going to be real clear. The bad's going to get worse, but the good's going to get better.
Yeah.
I really believe that with everything in me.
Yeah. I see that division already now today, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's the power. I'm glad you brought that up because I firmly believe in that. We need to say no, all of us, at the most microscopic level. Morality and integrity are a way out of this. How have they done all the control? Because humans are doing their bidding without us complying and consenting. That this makes it much, much harder for them. And you know, when I got out, I was a teenager, like 17, 18, and I just got to a point, it's hard to explain, but I just got to a point where I snapped and it was like, fuck no, you're not
Yeah.
going to do me one more goddamn time. I'm done. And the anger raised some wind. It raised us like I was outside. I was being put through a ritual where I was supposed to carry a big heavy cross like Jesus, and the dust started to circle, and it was this power in me. It was almost, it was God speaking through me, and I was just like, no. And then I left, and that was it, you know. And
Yeah.
that might sound fantastical, but something in me knew that if I say no, it's that choice, you know. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. And I think there's a couple reasons for why the world's the way it is right now. I think one is people have been not been aware of the occultic agenda behind things, a lot of the things we see for many years. Now, I think as in my first in 2000 on my blog, I had written that they were going to start surfacing in 2020, that they would begin revealing themselves. And I think that's because back then I knew their plans, and they have.
Yep.
Because it doesn't make sense when you see, I'm going to use the United States as one example, and another could be other countries. But let's say in the US, if people just wanted money and power, they wouldn't be destroying the economy or doing some of the things they're doing, but they want people terrified and helpless. That's the goal. And then they can step in and control. If you read like anything written by the World Economic Forum or even Foreign Affairs magazine, you're going to see terrible agendas for the world. So that's the goal is to control mankind. I agree. But people are unaware of evil, and they're unaware of the God of the Bible. And that's what makes them vulnerable then to control. If you're a person just going around going, well, I just want to be happy and I want my life to be good and lots of money and blah, 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 and play plenty of video games, you're going to be vulnerable then to not questioning what's going on quite as much. You might sense, well, the economy's bad or something's not good, but you're not going to know that there's real evil trying to control things.
Yeah.
But if you know the real Jesus, not the fake one, but the real one of the Bible, you and if you choose to serve and obey him, you're going to know and you're going to take action. You're going to know, hey, this is evil. This goes beyond just normal political factions. And by the way, I think both sides are equally controlled. So I'm not taking a side here at all. Okay. And so, and at that point, then I believe it takes prayer to turn things around. I really do.
Yeah.
That's my
And
belief.
I think it takes a choice,
Yeah.
to, it's all always been out there, so to speak, in plain sight if one
Mhm.
goes to look for it, right? These agendas
Yeah.
have been written, a long, long time ago. And
Yeah.
I remember, I have a audiographic memory, and I would listen to things they said, and then like as they would happen in time, I would think, oh, I remember that. And so absolutely, this whole COVID thing, and
Mhm.
now today it's in our face. They want to live openly as Satanists and normalize pedophilia. Look at Hollywood. Look at all the music industry. It's right there in our face. Look at the school system now. Look at the UNICEF document that says, children by the time they're in kindergarten should be taught masturbation and blah, blah,
Yeah.
online
Oh
porn. I
yeah.
mean, there it is, right there
But
now.
look at the Satan clubs they're starting in
Yes,
schools.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yep. And the
Yeah.
statues, the statues of Satan that are springing up everywhere, including, I haven't been back to Italy in a few years, but I heard there's one in front of the Colosseum now, you
Okay.
know?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
well, talk about showing your colors.
Yep. So they're showing themselves, but you're right. A lot of people they're so mind controlled, and and it's also keeping us in a frequency of survival. So these people, they know the nervous system, they know the brain, they know psychology, and they keep everyone, and they use fear as a tool. If I like to mention David Hawkins's map of consciousness, because it's a nice illustration, and he has these emotions in a bandwidth that's, he calls it survival, and fear is there. So is it an accident? I don't think so, that they're always pumping out fear. Is it fear of a terrorism when they're the only terrorists on the planet, or fear of a virus that they manufacture? It's always fear, fear,
Mhm.
fear, because that keeps the brain in survival. And then the prefrontal cortex doesn't, it usually shuts down in a situation of actual danger,
Yeah.
because thinking takes too long. So it's a reactive brain, right? But they
Oh yeah.
keep everyone in there
Oh yeah.
deliberately.
Well, if you look at COVID, it was well planned before, I mean, there are videos that absolutely show how they did simulations months
Yeah,
before it ever came out. So I think you'd have to be pretty unaware to not realize that some of this stuff, what was all intentional to create great fear. And I believe they're going to try to create another fear-based either pandemic or some other thing that's going to create fear for the same reason. Because, like you said, when someone is in terror, they're more suggestible and they don't question.
yeah.
And one of the greatest gifts God gave us is the ability to question stupidity. you know, what
Yeah. It's that Hegelian dialectic, though. It's that manipulation. They create the trauma, the problem, and then they know what the psychological reaction will be, and then they run in with their, "Oh, we'll save you, just do this." And that's what you were
yeah.
saying earlier. They're going to
Hmm.
destroy the economy. They're going to destroy everything, so that people are so terrified and stressed out and in absolute survival that whatever solution people are given, they will take it, even if that
Yes.
solution's to their own demise, right?
Right. Or if there's someone comes on the scene offering to be the solution, people will turn to that person. Because when
Right.
you're terrified, you're going to want comfort in your terror. And if someone seems comforting and to offer a way out, people will want it. They'll grab for it if they don't know any better, instead of
Yeah.
looking carefully at who or what is offering the comfort.
Right. I call it the savior. People want to be saved. So is it an ex-president? Is it ETs coming down from the skies in spaceships? Is it whatever? There's some figure, or some, I know they want to have Lucifer or Satan run in as the savior. That's the whole Antichrist program. It's like, oh, this being will, everything will be made right.
Yeah.
Just hand over your power over here. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Jesuit order believes that there will be a person that will offer the solution. you know. But that's a whole other topic. I'm not, it would take too long to talk about that today. And I know we're kind of getting towards the end of our time too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, as we kind of wrap up, I just want to kind of open it to you to, are there things that you want to people to understand or know? You know, are there some last words or, you know, thoughts that you want to leave people with? You know, we've sort of identified the issue, and so also, like, what do you think the solution is, and how do we overcome what is being done to us right now?
Okay. I, I this is a big problem, and I personally don't have the solution, but here's are some thoughts.
Okay.
I want the Christian church to wake up because it's been asleep for years. They have the solution, but they haven't known it because most people don't want to look at this. Most Christians want to go to church and be happy and not think about what's going on behind the scenes. Now, there are some ministries starting to look or to peek, and then they kind of put the cover back down, then they peek up, under and they put it down because it's frightening.
Yeah.
And also, this is a difficult topic to address with people because most people are terrified of it. They don't want to believe that things like this happen. And so people need to fight their own denial too. But I think we need to be kind in how we approach it with others though too, because sometimes people just don't have the inner resources or strength to want or be able to look at it, whether they're a politician, whether they're, you know, the lady down the street, the neighbor down the street, the grocery guy. I mean, most people are emotionally unprepared to look at things like this. I would love to see advocacy where, and that's why I'm talking on your podcast because people, I wish there was more awareness of this. I wish there's a way to get the word out in a way that's real, believable, and doesn't sound extremist. Hey, wake up, start, do something, pray, help survivors, help others, work against this, pray against it. But don't just sit back and say, oh, well, I'm going to wait for the rapture while the world around you goes to heck in a handbasket, if you know what I mean. Um, I think that educating oneself is a step, and personally asking God, what can I do to make a difference myself, and seeing what you hear. Um, I mean, I doubt that Klaus Schwab and some of the others are going to suddenly see the light and change. And I think we're going to see some pretty rough things coming in the next 10 years, in my opinion. But I also think we're going to see an outpouring of God's love and his help and even miracles on the other side, too. I think the battle lines are going to be drawn and we're going to see who wins. And I know who wins.
Yeah.
And so I would say be on the winning side, which is the real Jesus, the God of the Bible, and not of the people that serve Satan.
I totally agree. And I would just add, go on our own healing journey, put ourselves back together,
Yes.
get rid of those traumas and those subconscious beliefs that are negative and the lies that we've been fed, because when we put ourselves back together and we step into our power, I believe we all came here with a mission of sorts, with something that we can contribute and do. With that, I always ask God every morning to work through me so that I can be guided to do whatever I can do. And if we
Mm-hmm.
start to get to that point, first we integrate ourselves, then we integrate with all of humanity because they've divided and conquered us in all these ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then and we have the divine behind us. That's an unstoppable formula right there, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do agree with if you're a survivor healing, of course. I wouldn't have the courage to share this if I had not worked very hard on my own healing. So that was a very good point. I agree.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much, Svali, for this conversation with me. I know it's going to open some eyes and, you know, help people. And as always, it's a testimony to the human spirit, to the divine nature of humanity, that we can be, you and I, who were, you know, in facilities in Rome and in the Vatican, can be here right now having a conversation
Yeah.
and you know, we've put ourselves back together. Well, if we can do it, then so can everybody, right?
Yes, I agree.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much. And I hope you might consider coming back again in the future. And, you know, this topic is so deep. We could do 100 interviews and still not get through it all. But thank you so much for what you do in service to God and humanity. And until next time.
Okay. Thank you and bless you. Thank you for having me on.